Good afternoon and welcome to our Family Voice Zoom session this afternoon with Professor Augusto Zimmermann. My name's Andrew McColl. I'm the Queensland Director of Family Voice. Just by way of introducing Dr. Zimmermann, he is the Head of Law and Professor at Sheridan College in Perth and Professor of Law Adjunct at the University of Notre Dame, Australia. He's a former Law Reform Commissioner with the Law Reform Commission of Western Australia from 2012 to 2017. And he has also served as Director of Postgraduate Research and the Associate Dean Research at Murdoch University School of Law. During his time at Murdoch University, Dr. Zimmermann was awarded the 2012 Vice Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Research. Augusto is also president of the Western Australian Legal Theory Association, the editor-in-chief of the Western Australian Jurist Law Journal, and the author of numerous articles and books, including his 3-volume collection on the Christian foundations of the common law and his recent book, Emergency Powers, COVID-19 Restrictions and Mandatory Vaccination. So it's a pleasure to welcome to our Zoom session this afternoon, Professor Augusto Zimmermann. Hello, Augusto. Now, just for the sake of our listeners today, what we plan to do is to offer Augusto some questions, and then in the latter third or so of our hour's broadcast, we'll be taking some questions from our listeners who may want to put one or two things to Augusto, and then so we'll round it up in about an hour at maximum. So, Augusto, starting off with our questions today to you, and thank you for joining with us today. So we're talking initially about the matter of the voice, which we're going to be voting on in only a few days' time. So, Professor Zimmermann, what do you think is lacking for the Aborigines in the Australian Constitution today that clearly requires us to vote for constitutional change?
Well, look, I don't think it lacks anything. The whole idea about having a constitution is to protect the rights of every single individual. Obviously, to amend the constitution so as to include a racial element is entirely counterproductive. And certainly if the Aborigines wish to have more independence and autonomy, the last thing to do is to be part of the system in such a manner. And not only that, to be relegated to the third tier, because the whole approach is that they should never belong to the society, but they should be excluded. And this voice idea is basically based on unconscious racism even, because it's telling them that they cannot be like us. They cannot perhaps aspire to, in the future, have a prime minister coming from an Aboriginal background, the likes of Jacinta Price and others, who deserve much better than to be considered and judged on the basis of races, of their race. So this idea of the voice is segregating a considerable parcel of the population to a place that doesn't really belong to them, because they deserve much better than this.
Okay, thank you. Well, we do know that Peter Credlin exposed the fact that the original Uluru Statement that was written by Professor Megan Davis is not just a one-page document, but actually runs to 26 pages. Now, the PM indicated in Parliament not long ago that he hadn't read the last 25 pages. He then exclaimed in a radio interview, "Why should I?" And then claimed that this whole edition seemed to be the work of a conspiracy theorist. What do you think this is boiling down to?
Well, you know, it's very interesting when they actually change their approaches on a daily basis. And they were previously very proud of the whole statement, or the Uluru Statement from the heart, that contains elements of spirituality, even that potentially contradict or violate one of the sections of the Constitution, namely Section 116. I have written a whole book, edited by the same, this book with Professor Gabriel Moyes, that's exactly about certain statements that are to be found in this document that raise my eyebrows, because they are connecting this with the practicing or the establishment of religion. So it's clearly that this is a much more ambitious goal. And of course, they say certain things to those who are already converted, where they can actually express themselves in a more open manner. But for those who are still in doubt, they don't tell us the whole truth, or they just hide some aspects of the project that are considered to be perhaps not to be of the knowledge of the community at large.
Right. So we do know also that Paul Kelly wrote in The Australian on the 9th of September that of The Voice that this model is neither modest nor simple. It's filled with complexity and unknowns. There are myriad grounds for objections in terms of principle and practicality. Much remains unknown, thereby giving the no camp an automatic pitch. If you don't know, vote no. Is Paul Kelly right?
Well, he is totally right, and especially after what we have experienced over the last 3 years or so, why on earth we would have to necessarily trust in what the political elite is trying to propose? But the vote for the yes camp, is a vote in the darkness. We actually do not know exactly what is going to be contained in the Constitution, because it's not made totally clear. And then in the end of the day, whatever they put in the Constitution becomes really serious stuff. And that can lead to what we should avoid by all means. That is, namely, the repetition of judicial activism of the level that is destroying the American constitutional model. So whatever you add about these elements in the Constitution, these things will ultimately have to be interpreted by an elected judicial elite. So it's going to cause all sorts of unintended consequences that can potentially further undermine the system of checks and balances. Certainly, it can potentially be very prejudicial to the realization of the rule of law. And undoubtedly, it can lead to practices such as of judicial activism that basically undermining the democratic process in certain countries. So this is potentially a very anti-democratic proposal that will give power not to the average Aborigine, but for potentially white, unelected elites that are not there to necessarily seek the best interests of this particular community.
So just thinking about this term judicial activism, Augusto, what does that mean to the average layman, the person in the street?
Yes, it's basically that judges can interpret the Constitution in a variety of ways. Some of these ways are not necessarily even taking into consideration the original intent of the legislator. So even though they might say that the purposes behind what they intend to do are noble and good, it doesn't really matter so much when the law is created, because judges can interpret, even in a postmodern fashion, the law as a living instrument. So, for instance, in America, who on earth would expect that the right to privacy, which is, or better saying, the right to property or due process, better saying, that's found in the Fifth Amendment to the American Constitution, would eventually lead to abortion on demand, or would eventually lead to same-sex marriage? So we are opening a Pandora box by adding these racial components to the Constitution that can lead to all sorts of unintended consequences. So it doesn't matter what these people are saying. What matters is that we are acting in such a irresponsible manner that contradicts what the founding fathers intended, that was to not give too much power to a particular branch of government, namely the judiciary.
Right. So, okay, so you've said that now. So does that really imply then that the voice could be a kind of a Trojan horse leading to much more than most Australians considered or wanted.
Totally. And that's the main problem, because all laws needs to be interpreted in a certain manner. So you see, I am a conservative or classical liberal legal thinker. So my understanding is that the Constitution should be interpreted according to the intention of the legislator. That's called originalism. But now we can interpret the Constitution literalistically and actually kill the spirit by trying to interpret the Constitution in a more literal fashion. But now, apart from this, we have the living Constitution approach, where judges can evolve the document according to the so-called changing needs of the society, as perceived by this unelected elite.
Okay. When we consider the known problems within the Aboriginal communities, such as alcohol abuse, domestic violence, the sexual abuse of children, the lack of male role models, and poor educational outcomes, can we be sure that the Voice will address any of these serious issues?
No, I think it's the very opposite, because you're removing from them their sense of personal responsibility. And you know very well that the welfare state has led to disastrous consequences within these different communities. You know that the United States, ever since that the welfare state grew in size, the African American families became more dysfunctional as a result. Many of these families do not know the parents, that some children don't know who the father is. And this is the same as what's happening in Australia, with the Aborigines being treated in a paternalistic manner. And when I say this is actually a sort of unconscious racism, it's just because we are telling them that they cannot be like others, and they have to be utterly dependent from government in order to survive even. And so what's taking place here is pretty simple. This is actually killing the Aboriginal community. That's actually causing the dysfunctionality. The more the state tries to intervene, the less dysfunctional these families become, because they expect no longer to be responsible for their actions, but to expect rather that the state is the ultimate provider and the paternal leader of the community. That's really a problem at the moment, and this is not going to help it, but it's going to aggravate it.
Thank you. So moving on to the matter of the misinformation legislation, Augusto, do you think that the Australian Constitution already protects freedom of speech?
Well, look, the High Court could have done more in terms of expanding the meaning of what free speech actually means, because you either support it entirely or not. But at least in the 1990s, they came up with this approach that having a representative democracy, system of representative government, you definitely need to have the free flow of ideas and the expression of ideas. So the High Court has made decisions in the sense that it acknowledges that in order to have a functional constitutional government, you definitely need to have the freedom of expression and freedom of speech. So this legislation, in this sense, contradicts decisions made by the High Court that are protective of the idea that when it comes to the communication of political views, those who express such views should be protected, constitutionally speaking, having this implied freedom available.
So do you think that the federal government's referendum on the Voice has really been a exercise in the misinformation itself?
It's quite amazing. I just got a text from a person telling me that he was unable to protest peacefully in Sydney with an Israeli flag because he was being attacked by extremists. And, you know, we didn't have the protection when you were fighting for freedom and human rights during the worst moments of the pandemic. So I don't think we actually have so much freedom in Australia anymore. And there is so many of these terrible anti-discrimination laws that actually reduce freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, that are essential elements for the proper functioning of a democratic system. So, I mean, it's hard to say that we still have a truly functional democracy in Australia, but you need to fight for the restoration of these freedoms. And rather than Christians demanding to be protected under anti-discrimination laws, I would now call every single believer to actually fight for the restoration of freedoms in general, because they have been under constant attack over the years. And this is just the culmination of the problem that in many ways was caused by a very irresponsible prime minister that we had in the past, that made that spurious claim that free speech was not important for him because it wouldn't create a single job. So we are very much paying a price for not having acted before, and for the omission of the Liberal Party when it was in power to repeal Section 18C, which has been used as an instrument of persecution against those who fight against racism, for instance, as happened to those students at UQT.
Right. So we do know that the 20th century demonstrated awful government abuse of innocent people using media control, propaganda, and lies.
Yeah.
Do you think that the misinformation legislation will simply lead to more of this?
It's pretty much of a joke, that at this point we have these people who have provided the real misinformation to tell that we, the people of Australia, we, the citizens of this country, cannot express our opinions. And I see that one of the sections, it seems to be section 2 of this proposal law, says that we cannot disrupt public order. What does it mean exactly? So we cannot be engaged, for instance, in organizing a rally for freedom. They talk about harm to health of Australians. I don't think anybody has caused more harm to the health of Australians than the government. And so, but they are not going to be targets of this legislation. Only those who try to raise their voices and are very qualified academics sometimes, very much that we know very well, that some people here, leading academics in their respective fields, in law, medicine, were trying to raise concerns about some of the policies that were implemented by the government over the last 3 years or so, and they were severely persecuted by the government. So there is another clause here talking about harm to the Australian environment. So I guess that anybody who dares to criticize the religion of climate change will be attacked as a result. So it's amazing that this is actually a massive attack on democracy. If this bill is implemented, it's the end of democracy and free speech in Australia. I can say it confidently.
So that would mean that there'd be one law for us and one law for the government.
Exactly. It's a typically fascistic model, because the first leader to introduce a misinformation bill, according to an article that I read in The Spectator, and I believe the information is accurate, the first leader was Mussolini, who introduced a similar misinformation bill in the 1930s in Italy.
Right.
It's a fascistic piece of legislation, simple as that.
Yeah. So what do you think the government's intention is here, and will it lead to greater control of the population?
Well, they want to actually not be bothered in controlling the masses. The whole idea is that perhaps we are thinking too much. We are bothering the status quo and interfering with their goals. So they want to make sure that nobody will be capable of raising concerns about certain policies that are being implemented and that potentially can cause harm to the society because they are based on the official propaganda of the state. So this is actually turning Australia into a Soviet Union, into a country where people cannot question the views of an oligarchy. It's simple as that. It's like the elites become each day more oligarchical and upset with the masses if they dare to actually question the narrative of their masters. So that's it's simple as that, I can tell.
So the only people that will benefit from this legislation might be, various governments themselves, but not us.
Yeah, that's right. They have their own voices to express their official opinions, and of course these people are very faithfully rewarded for this. I mean, you have different grants and money flowing as a result of this. You know very much that, for instance, the pharmaceutical industry was sponsoring certain policies of the Australian government during during the worst period of our history. So how can you actually think that these policies are actually totally unbiased and neutral? And certainly once they start with something that goes entirely wrong, they don't want to be held accountable for their actions. And they are basically making sure that those who dare to question the policies of the masters will be punished as if you were a bunch of slaves and not sovereign citizens. So one thing I have to tell you, and every single person who is listening to this program, is that we cannot have, and once again I have to make the point, a real democracy if we do not express our opinions with freedom. And this is already happening because I'm telling you so that I myself feel sometimes very worried about what I say. And I even have to actually protect myself as a result of having autos insurance and things like that, because we do not have the confidence to express our opinions in our society any longer.
So just thinking about how we can best deal with this, Augusto, would you recommend that the listeners that we have make preparations to speak to the local federal members and voice their opinion to those federal members?
Yes, that's right. This is an important point because politicians like to be receiving the popular support in terms of, for instance, returning to power. I noted when I was a commissioner, my interactions with politicians, I was a law reform commissioner in Western Australia. It was just about returning to power. It was just about staying in power. So most of these people are utilitarian in this aspect. And that's why they take decisions that can be quite immoral, because what they think is about numbers. So we need to put pressure on them. You need to make sure that these people do the right thing, because otherwise the other side is more, even if it is a minority, but they are more mobilized and they are going to impose their will upon a reluctant majority. So the majority has to be less reluctant. We need to express our feelings and make sure that in this referendum, everybody goes there and do the right thing and make sure that they vote properly. And we reverse this problem in the referendum regarding the voice thing.
Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Peter, and he may have some questions coming in steadily from our viewers, whether it be for The Voice, Augusto, or on Misinformation. So Peter, do you have any questions there for us, for Augusto?
Yes, I do, Andrew. So we'll go back to The Voice. And I've got a question from Peter. Do you believe the NIAA is an adequate body to represent the needs of our First Nations people?
Well, I don't think this is the case at all, because these people come from an idea that they represent the Aborigines. But even the representation of this group is not necessarily based on a proper democratic process. So, I mean, most of these Aboriginal leaders, they are self-appointed people, but they're not really chosen by the community. So the voice thing, another problem that I can tell you is that we do not even know who is going to be representing them in this third-tier chamber in Parliament, and also devising the government of the day. Another thing I must say is that these groups, they presuppose that everybody thinks collectively. I wouldn't say that Caucasians would think the same on every single issue. This is almost bordering idea of genetic determinism, and saying that the Aborigines are wired to think in a same manner, every single one of them. It's a disrespect of the right of the individual to express his or her opinions in a different manner, even disagreeing with the group. This is collectivism. This is totalitarianism. This is actually against traditions of rights and freedoms in Australia. This is an anti-freedom, anti-rights position, the Voice one.
Thank you, Augusto. I have another question here. Should those who want to change the Constitution spell out exactly the words that will be inserted or deleted from the Constitution?
That's exactly why we should be suspicious. Huh? You see very much that so many people trying to raise concerns or other issues had their social media cancelled, had their Facebooks Facebook platform canceled, and and they were eventually vindicated for expressing different points of view. So it's quite clear that that there is the best way to know things, the best way to know the truth is to be exchanging ideas and to be free to participate in the free exchange of these ideas. So clearly, this is going the wrong way. Clearly, this is actually to prevent the expression of the truth, the manifestation of concerns that people have. It's like signing a blank check. I'm not going to trust these people to tell them they can do whatever they want. It would be an act of madness. To be frank with you, intelligent people, rational people would never trust the government in such a manner to actually tell that they can think and do whatever they want after it's too late. I mean, this is actually something that should be very clear, and you should exactly have 100% of knowledge what's going to be created. And at this point, we don't know. And if you do not know, it would be really very, very unwise to trust the oligarchs to be doing the job for us. I don't trust them, and I don't think anybody should.
Thank you, Augusto. Another question. Should there have been a constitutional convention before proposing a change to the Constitution?
Well, not necessarily. You have 128, which is basically one of the best aspects of our Constitution, apart from the fact that we cannot directly propose a constitutional amendment, which is a mistake, in my opinion. I'm not a person who worships our Constitution and doesn't see problems with the Constitution. There are some problems with the original document. And one of the problems is that the masses, the people, cannot propose amendments to the Constitution. We need to rely on the political class to do so. But the best aspect, one of the best of the Constitution, is the fact that it's a very democratic process in order for the Constitution to be amended. In America, the process is a very difficult one, and it's not so democratic. Here, what we have is the need to have a majority of the people in the majority of the states. And that's why most of the amendments have been rejected by the people, because they ask us to concentrate more power in Canberra, to centralize more power, and we have basically said no. It's not that it's difficult to amend the Constitution. The fact is that we have rejected most of the amendments because they were asking us to trust Canberra more than we should, and people were wise enough to say no.
Thank you again. Another question. What's the likely view of the High Court should the voice pass on the duty of the government to consult the voice?
Well, this is another thing that if we don't know what is going to be contained in the document, it's very hard to predict. But certainly, whatever it is there, it's going to create more distinctions and special rights and privilege to certain categories of people on the basis of their ethnicity. And that actually can aggravate the racial problem in Australia. One thing that we should be very proud in this nation is that we do not discriminate on religious grounds or racial grounds or whatever grounds. So that is the most important aspect of our document, that is to actually make sure that people are not going to be separated or segregated within our society. So I actually am very worried about this, because we are basically trying to copy the American model, and this you see that is causing social disruption in that nation. So we do not want to import what doesn't work elsewhere. We do not have the need for that. And what we need is to make sure that people have the right to celebrate their cultures in peace and being left alone. I was born in Brazil. As you can see, my accent is different. And I'm very happy to talk about my culture. I'm very happy to like to play soccer and good Brazilian music. But I want to be left to do my things without the interference of the government. So the Aborigines in Australia, they need to be liberated. They need to be set free from this sort of government dependency that's causing them all the social ills that we know so very well.
Thanks again, Augusto. What would a Christian solution to the Aboriginal problems look like, particularly from a legal perspective?
Yeah, some of these problems, that are connected with lifestyles and the culture of victimization or victimization is a major problem within the Aboriginal community. So in many ways, we should give them a sense of hope and courage to be able to strive and to fight for their rights, but at the same time protecting their families and being accountable for their actions. If the government hands out these things without accountability, it's basically dooming them. It's basically condemning them to repeat their vices. So there is a whole Aboriginal industry behind this, people who are profiting at the expense of all this misery, and they are never going to solve the problem. When I was at Murdoch, I used to talk to my friend Gabriel. If we wanted to not solve a problem, we set up a committee. I remember that we had some troublemakers there. When we wanted to make a decision. But if you do not want to solve a problem, create a special committee, an organization or whatever to look after these matters, because they start to create the bureaucracy behind. And the bureaucrats are never going to solve a problem because they lose their jobs if they do so. So, in a certain sense, these industries benefiting just a small part of the population who actually thrives at the expense of not solving necessarily the problem.
Yeah, thanks, Augusto. The final one on the voice question is, how could the church help the plight of the Aborigines?
Yes, I think that's the main problem, the lack of compassion that's caused by this terrible worship of government that we have in Australia, which is a form of idolatry, that expect the government to do things that we should be doing by ourselves or for ourselves. So in many ways, my advice to the churches is that they should be doing more and they should expect less of the government. We have become so dependent on government. It's actually, we do not seek solutions in a normal way. We think, oh, the government will fix this, or the government will provide the solution, and the government becomes a god. So I saw this during COVID, this worship of government in the churches, So this is the main problem that we have in Australia. People have to start to have a better sense of self-respect and self-dignity. And that's the message that must be sent to every single Australian, not just the Aborigines, but every single one. We expect too much of government to become dependent on them, and we think that they are a solution for our problems, when some problems have been created by this, has been created by these false, deceptive points of view that actually are contrary to a better understanding of reality and even human nature, I must say.
Very true, Augusto. Now, moving to some questions on the Misinformation Bill. I got one from Daryl here. Will the Misinformation Bill be able to prevent hate speech and other comments that lead to dysfunction in society without affecting free speech?
Definitely so. And the concept of hate speech sometimes is actually not really about hate, but it's about opinions. And people have so much disregarded objective truths that it would be hateful to tell the truth these days. You know very well that our Lord and Savior was crucified for telling the truth. And that would be considered then, or was considered to be then, a sort of a hate speech. Otherwise, he wouldn't have to pay the price. So the point is that that is the main problem, that sometimes a message of love, sometimes you'd have to tell the truth because we really have real compassion for someone. And if you see the person doing something that you do not agree with, and the person should be tolerant to understand that it's just you having an opinion, but opinions now are being canceled. And you know that Section 86 has nothing to do with the truth at all. It's just about people feeling offended. So can I say something that I think it's important? I've written articles about that. these are instruments of bigotry, of intolerance, these laws. So the more intolerant a person is, the more the person feels offended. And the more the person feels offended, the more he goes using these instruments to be silencing people. So the hate laws are used by the haters, and they're used by the intolerant bigots who actually use this to silence the opinions of those who dare to have just a different opinion. And that's the main problem. And the threshold is so low that it says that people cannot be offended. Oh my God, so what happens here? What happens here? These people who are very intolerant of other people's opinions, they use the law as an instrument of persecution and of intolerance, which is quite amazing because it should be the other way around.
Yes, thank you, Augusto. Now, I've got a comment and a question from Michelle. She says, I think this will lead to concentration camps like the Nazis, etc. What do you think, Augusto?
I don't know. I mean, she would have to elaborate a bit more on this. I haven't had this sort of thought, really.
Sure. All right. Another one on the misinformation bill. What should be the legitimate limits of free speech in a free society like ours?
Well, we already had it down. I mean, it's basically to go back to the basics. You should not threaten anybody. You should not incite violence, and should not make slanderous and defamatory statements. So apart from this, everybody else should have the freedom to express their opinions. And the problem with this sort of approach, misinformation bill, it's not that you are doing such things, you're just having an opinion. And the best way to combat a bad opinion is to have a counter argument. It's actually, I think these people actually are telling lies, perhaps because they do not want you to challenge them. I mean, I'm confident about my opinions, and I actually like to be engaged in a proper conversation because I'm a civilized person, I'm very tolerant, and I'm open for discussions. This bill is very suspicious because it's telling us that we should believe in what the government says. We should not question the narrative of the government. Especially over the last 2 years, you know that this is not necessarily what I'm willing to be doing, because I have learned that most of what they have proposed more recently, objectively speaking, is wrong.
Well, thank you very much, Augusto. That's the end of the questions I have from the audience. Andrew, back to you.
Thank you, Peter. Well, thank you once again, Professor Augusto Zimmermann, for taking time with us this afternoon. We've all appreciated your wisdom, your expertise in matters of the law and the Constitution. Thank you again, and we trust you.
Thank you.
You have a profitable kind of week ahead of you. All the best.
Thank you very much. God bless you, and keep up with the good work.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye.